So good evening and welcome to Slooh. My name is Helen Avery and I'm going to be here for the next hour or so for this week's constellation stories, and tonight we're exploring the zodiac constellation Gemini. So I'm just noticing if you're joining us in the space situation room I'm just checking that my screen is not up yet, but I'm sure we're on it. So just while we're waiting for that to kick in, we're just having a mild technical issue. Okay, let me just check what's happening in the back end. If you just bear with us one moment. At least I'm here. This is all good. Okay, apparently we're all good. Just not seeing our screen on the... Here we go. Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at, as I said, the constellation Gemini. And we're going to be sort of looking, because there's constellation stories, at why the twins were so important to the ancients, and how did so many cultures around the world view the stars that we know as Castor and Pollux as a pair. Is there a deeper meaning behind the tales of heroism of these two brothers? And we'll be exploring the role of the divine double that appears again and again through stories through humanity, as well as we'll be taking a look at these two stars to see for ourselves whether the twins are identical. And then in the second half, we'll be also delving into the Eskimo nebula, the jellyfish nebula, and the M35 star cluster to check out some of the other cool things to see in the constellation. So if you're out and about this evening and gazing up at the stars, or if you have any questions you want to ask about Gemini as we're going along, then as we're not on Facebook this evening, I'm going to suggest you can just email me instead, and it's helen@slooh.com. I gather that we do have a chat coming, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm just going to flip to the space situation room and just see what is going on. Okay. Right. Here we go. Great. I was having a problem with my... There we go. Fantastic. So we're going to be hanging out in the space situation room this evening. If you're watching on YouTube, then just pop on over. It's free. Come on over to the space situation room. I will have a couple of visuals up tonight, but mainly we're going to be flipping through the telescopes. So you'll see underneath the screen with my picture, where it says Constellation Stories, you'll see a main show tab, Canary All Sky, Canary Half Meter, and the other telescopes that we've got set up this evening. And it's looking okay in the Canary Islands in terms of cloud coverage. We don't seem to have much. Paul Cox just told me that the moon is beginning to show up, and also that there is some cloud that's preventing a few missions, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not going to affect us tonight. So again, if you're out and about, or if you're looking up at Gemini, or if you have any questions, you can drop me an email. I'm going to try and keep an eye on them while we're talking this evening. And it's helen@slooh.com. Otherwise, we'll be here in the space situation room. So I just wanted to start off with orienting ourselves tonight. So where can we find Gemini? And one of the ways I like to do this is just click on the Canary All Sky camera. So the Canary All Sky camera, if you've just clicked on that, you can see Orion, and that's sort of visible by those three diagonal dots, sort of in the middle right of the screen. That's Orion's belt, and Betelgeuse is the orangey star above it, slightly on the left-hand side. And as we learned last time we were together talking about Taurus, if you follow that line of Orion's belt all the way, sort of if it carries on upwards, you'll come across sort of a yellowish star, and that's Aldebaran in the constellation Taurus. And then the way I like to find Gemini, maybe it's sort of about way of doing it, is I follow the line of Orion's belt up to Aldebaran, that orange star, and then I come off back in the opposite direction. So I'm heading left this time on the all sky camera, by the way. It might be different in the sky depending on where you are. But in the all sky camera, I head off left, and you'll see these two dots. One is, well, I don't want to give anything away. Two dots. They look different colours, but that's all I'm saying. And those are Castor and Pollux. Castor is the star that is nearer the top of the screen if you're looking through the all sky camera, and Pollux is the one under it. And those are the twins we're going to be talking about. So it's not too hard to find. Actually, once you sort of orient yourselves around Orion, some people orient themselves around Capella. This is just the way I like to do it. And if you want to switch back to click on main show, so we're back on our main page. Okay, I'm just going to change this visual for a second so you can see where is Gemini. Hopefully that works. Let's have a look. I'm just seeing if you can see what I see. We are doing a test run this evening of there we go, you can, great. Just doing a test run this evening of sort of working this out on my own, so if I'm a bit slow, just forgive me. I'll get used to it. So there you can see, look, Orion's belt, up to Aldebaran in Taurus, and then up and over to the heads of our twins that will be Castor and Pollux. Great, fantastic. So hopefully that's of some help when you're out, because what we really want you to do at Slooh is go out and look up so that you can see the stars. So you'll work your way around and sort of, like get together a map in your head of where the stars are, and then join us on Slooh to share about it and share about your experience, but also to get a deeper look through our telescopes. So we're going to be taking a deeper look, first of all, at Castor. So in the let me see, the Canary wide field, there we go. That, if you click on the Canary wide field, the tab just under, what you should find is that you are looking at Castor. This looks really bright and white. And as the next, we've got Castor for another about 8 minutes or so. I just want you to kind of keep an eye on how bright Castor is, maybe any color that you noticed in Castor as we go on. Castor is the alpha star in Gemini, and it's about, I've read between 40 to 49 light years away. You wouldn't want to get that calculation wrong when you're filling up on fuel, I guess, but it's not one star. It's actually, there we go, some color coming in, but it's a system of 6 stars that are gravitationally bound to each other. So I say, if you want to just keep an eye, there we go, it's turning blue. Beautiful. And you can always take a photo of it if you head over to the telescope section of the website and click on Canary 2. You'll see it there and you can take a picture. So right now we're looking at Castor, as I said, but really let's sort of begin this evening with a story. And the story of Gemini is a story of 2 brothers. So who were these 2 brothers? So the legend has it that Castor and Pollux, or actually Castor and Polyjuices, as he was first known to the Greeks, hatched from an egg. Not the same egg, mind you, because their mother, Leda, wife of the king of Sparta, had been seduced one night by the Olympian god Zeus, who appeared to her as a giant swan. About the same time, Leda also lay with her husband, Tyndareus. So 9 months on, or however long it took in Greek myth, Leda lay 2 eggs. And inside one was Castor, who we're looking at now, and his sister Clytemnestra, and they were the children of her mortal husband, so they themselves mortal. And in the other egg, when it hatched, out came Pollux and Helen, who would later become Helen of Troy. And they had inherited Zeus's traits, their father's trait Zeus, and were immortal. So Castor and Pollux, one mortal, this one we're looking at, and one immortal, twins and brothers, despite their differences, were inseparable. So together they're known as the Dioscuri, the sons of God. And both were very well loved and heroic to the Greeks and also to the Romans. They both ride white stallions, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And while Castor is supposedly the better horseman, Pollux is said to be the better with his fists. He was a boxer. But together they both rode horses, and they both won battles and did heroic deeds. And whenever there's a crisis, the two are called upon. So they assist Jason and the Argonauts on the voyage on the Argo to bring back the Golden Fleece, which we'll hear a bit more about later. They saved their sister Helen on several occasions. And in terms of personality, obviously heroic and good. But Castor is said to be a little more hot-headed, and Pollux a little more patient and virtuous. And this will all become relevant later. But what they also were a pair of love-struck fools. And the recipients of their affections were the two sisters, the Leucipides. Interestingly or coincidentally, Leucipides means the daughters of the white horse. So a lot of reference to white horse, which we'll talk about later. But there was one glitch with these affections, and that was that these two, the Leucipides, were betrothed already to none other than the cousins of Castor and Pollux. But this did not stop our heroes, who swept in on their own white horses and took the two sisters back with them to Sparta. And that was essentially the beginning of the end for our two dear brothers. And indeed, it sparked a war because the cousins took their revenge on Castor and Pollux for stealing their women, and they duped them out of a herd of cattle. And Castor, a little hot-headed, and Pollux, ready with his fists, wanting to take revenge, they left their sister Helen alone with none other than Paris, the Prince of Troy, in order to go and get their herd of cattle back. And of course, that gave Paris the opportunity to kidnap Helen, that ultimately led to the start of the Trojan War. But even before all of that, Castor and Pollux didn't even see the Trojan War, because while Castor and Pollux were carrying out their plan to get the cattle back, their cousins caught them and killed Castor. So Pollux, immortal, heartbroken to have lost his best friend and brother and to live on while Castor is dead, begs his father Zeus to bring Castor back to life. But Zeus can only offer a compromise, and that is that Pollux shares his immortality with Castor. So what that means is they have to spend their time alternating between Hades, the underworld where mortals went to die, and the heavens with the gods in the sky at night. So that is why we see Castor and Pollux in the sky at night, and then when it's daytime they are underground in the world of Hades. So I just want to pause there and just really take a look through the Canary Wide Field. If you're joining us in the Space Situation Room, the fourth tab underneath, Canary Wide Field, we're just looking at Castor, and as you can see, it's has a blue taint to it. And we're going to be looking at Pollux in a minute. So, a tragic story for Castor and Pollux, really, but one that's sort of ingrained throughout myth, and we're talking more about the other myths of twins, very, very similar later, of the fact that these two really are one and the same. That they cannot be separated. The immortal and mortal cannot be separated, and they don't want to be. They don't want to be. They're together. So we're just switching to hopefully viewing Pollux. As I said, if you can remember just how bright Castor was and the kind of colour, and now we're going to be taking a look at Pollux. So here is just coming through Pollux. So Pollux is actually brighter than Castor, and that's because it's nearer. It's about 34 light years away. And we'll see as the colour comes in that Pollux is actually a red giant. So it has an orange hue to it, which I just love. So despite them being sort of twins, they're not identical twins. One is very blue and one is orange. And actually Pollux is the 17th brightest star in the sky, even though it's the beta. This is something else we're going to talk about a little later, how even though it's the brightest, it is the beta. It has a luminosity of about 32 times that of the sun, and it has an exoplanet, which makes Pollux pretty exciting. So not only are they very different, these two brothers, one is like 6 stars, and one is a red giant with an exoplanet, but they're also far apart. So if a light year is about 6 trillion miles, then at the sort of top end of estimations for how far these stars are, they're about 90 trillion miles apart, which is so. How close are these brothers? Although they are very, very close, they're actually not close at all, which I love, because it's just another sort of play on this paradox, I suppose, of immortal and mortal, close but miles and miles apart. So I just wanted to share another visual with you. If you want to hop back to the main show screen, and if you're on YouTube, you can just stay where you are. Okay, because only this week I was on the Slooh site and I really wanted to see the difference in the two stars, so I took photos of each one, and then I did a collage of them. Hang on a minute. And I did a collage of them and I put it together. So hopefully you will see this now. So you can see them side by side, and then you really get a sense of Pollux being brighter and the difference in the colour. So hopefully you can see this right now. So my screen's a bit slow because I've got some software going. I just want to check you can see this. Might be a bit of a delay. There we go. So sorry if you saw that before me. I'm just going to have a bit of delay because I'm streaming. So yeah, so you can see here the difference, and you can also see the orange. And I thought it was interesting because so many sports teams, I know a lot of people are watching sports tonight. I gather the Steelers are playing. A lot of sports teams have blue and orange in America. And I've always thought, how bizarre, like two colours that I would never ever put together by choice. And then I thought, and yet here they are, in a natural environment, completely complementing one each other, blue and orange. So I loved that. Okay, so I'm just going to hop back, and we'll hop back over to the Canary Widefield so we can just keep looking at Pollux. See some colour comes through. So as I say, Castor and Pollux, as they're originally known to the Greeks, also became Roman gods. So there's a really beautiful, I know Paul mentions he's into old astronomy books. I totally with him, and I also into just old books in general. And I found this beautiful old book written in 1914 by an Isabel Lovell, and it's stories from the Roman Forum, stories in stone from the Roman Forum. So in Rome, and you can still go and see the relics of this. It was the temple of Castor and Pollux, and they weren't sort of taken straight away, Castor and Pollux. They weren't just like, a lot of the Greek myths were just like adopted by Romans. It wasn't the way at all. But then something happened, and it's a really beautiful story, so I thought I'd read it to you while we're gazing at Pollux. So one evening, although the twilight was fast darkening into night, the Forum of Rome was full of people. Men were talking together in anxious groups. Magistrates were holding long consultations, for the army had gone out to battle against their exiled king, Tarquin the Proud, and that day there had been a hard fight at Lake Regillus, not many leagues from Rome. And this is in about the 400s BC. Many were the heavy hearts weighed down with fear as the night drew on, and still no tidings of either weal or woe. Many were the watchful eyes strained far into the gathering shadows for the messenger hourly expected from the Roman hosts. Now close by the temple of Vesta there was a spring that belonged, it is said, to the nymph Juturna. And so pure and clear were these waters that they were believed to bring healing to mankind. Some citizens, in their restless wanderings, now came near this fountain of Juturna, and most surprising was the sight that met their eyes. Before them stood two noble warriors, whose steeds, all flecked with foam, were drinking from the sacred spring. The armour of these strangers gleamed brightly in the dusk, although they had the air of those that had not only ridden far and fast, but that had fought hard and long. In each right hand was a mighty spear, and upon each egg-shaped helmet shone a star. In awed tones the news of their arrival passed from man to man, until all that were in the forum had gathered about the warriors, who, unmindful of the multitude, continued to refresh themselves and their pure white chargers with the sparkling waters. However, when everyone had drawn near, the splendid strangers stood up side by side, and as with a single voice, spoke to the spellbound people, saying, "Hail, men of Rome, let your hearts be uplifted. From Lake Regillus do we come, and would have you know that Tarquin is vanquished, and that Rome's standards are planted in his very camp. Right valiant has been the fight for the cause of Rome. This day has been defended by the favour of the gods." Having thus spoken, the glistening knights remounted their noble steeds, quieting them by calling their names in gentle tones, "Ho, Canthus, now then, good Cyrillus." And the voice of these warriors was like the sound of deep, sweet music. Then, with a gesture of farewell, they gave rein to their horses, rounded the road by the Temple of Vesta, and were gone. No trace of the mysterious riders could be found, and a wonderment, almost of fear, seized upon the people in the very midst of their rejoicing. Some murmured that the warriors had been but a vision of overwearied brains, but the more devout among them declared that these had been no earthly visitors, and that none less than Castor and Pollux, sons of Jupiter, had brought this good news to the Roman people. At this still greater gladness reigned, and the Romans continued their rejoicings, recalling to one another the many marvellous deeds of these great brothers. I love this. One, because it's written in 1914, and I just love that. But I love this recount of this story, and this is a story that's been told for many, many years. This is an adaptation, obviously, in 1914 of this same story. But the story was also that Castor and Pollux arrived on the battlefield in this particular battle that very day. So they were seen on the battlefield, and the soldiers knew they'd be fine because Castor and Pollux had arrived, and they were, they knew from Greek myth were the protectors of soldiers and of seafarers. They were good omens for fertility and anything to do with water, actually. And they were the gods of horses. So if you were in battle with horses and Castor and Pollux arrived for you, then what good fortune. So that's the story the Romans had, and so from then on they built a temple to Castor and Pollux, and then became sort of worshipped them. So actually you see Castor and Pollux on coins. There are several statues in Rome, which I have a picture of, actually. If you're interested, obviously stay staring at Canary Widefield at Pollux if you choose, but if you want to hop back to the main show, I have a visual of, let me see, the where are we going with this? The Met Museum. Here we go. It's a bit off to the right, and that's for reasons I'll show you in a minute. So these are the two warriors, Castor and Pollux. The egg-shaped helmet obviously comes because they came from eggs, from later, as we discussed earlier. So, and also one thing the Romans, they really did worship Castor and Pollux, probably more than, maybe not more than the Greeks, but the fact they built a temple to them and put them on coins it sort of says it all. But also they made they sort of signed treaties and deals by swearing on Gemini, and Gemini is Latin for twins. So they were swearing on these two brothers, you'd shake hands and say, "By Gemini." by Gemini, I'll give you 20 slaves or something. I'm watching Rome, the HBO series at the minute, and there seems to be a lot of bartering in slaves. So, and they shake on it and say, by Gemini, I'll pay you. And that, interestingly, has worked its way into our language today. Maybe we don't go around saying by Gemini, but by Jiminy is actually a derivative of Gemini. It's sort of morphed into Jiminy, and maybe we don't go around shaking hands and saying, by Jiminy, I'll buy your coffee later to pay you back. But we do find Jiminy Cricket, who's seen as a jolly good fellow in Pinocchio. So it is there still today. So while we're hanging out here, if you're either looking at Pollux in the Canary Widefield, or whether you're with me on the audio screen where we're looking at these statues of Castor and Pollux. And I'm keeping them up for the simple reason that so in India there's also the tale of two brothers. They're called the Ashvins, and they were mentioned in the Vedic texts, the Rig Veda, and that was written about 1700 BC. So even before the Romans, these twins were mentioned. And I'm just going to pull up a picture so you can see the Ashvin twins. There we go. So hopefully you can see that, and you can begin to see the similarities. So here we have these two brothers. They look a bit prettier, I have to say, the Indian version, but they have something on the head that one could think maybe like an egg-shaped helmet, and they are riding a white horse. So the Ashvins of this Hindu religion, Ashvins means horseman, and they rode on white horses, just like Castor and Pollux. Just like Castor and Pollux, they were the sons of a god, not Zeus, but they were sons of a sky god. And some translations of the Rig Veda say that one was mortal and one was immortal. And the Ashvins protected their sister Surya, the sun. And by the way, Helen, the sister that Castor and Pollux protected, means bright and bright light. So very similar already. And like Castor and Pollux, the Ashvins have a lot of hymns written about them, of their tales, of heroic tales at sea, their Vedic hymns. One of them is, one of the sort of most famous with the Ashvins, is this rescue of Bujyu, who's cast overboard by his father and other crew members, and then the Ashvins appear fast as thoughts with flying red horses and save the would-be victim. Now compare that to Homer's hymn about Castor and Pollux, that Castor and Pollux arrive with miraculous speed upon horses with red shining wings to save a ship in distress. In addition, the Ashvins were also seen as healers and doctors, and the Ashvins were called upon to keep agreement those who had joined by a treaty. So some wonderful similarities that just kind of wanted to share to show how these stories travel like miles and miles and miles and get passed on. And in fact, it's not just in India and in Greece and Rome. We actually see this similar stories in the Baltics. So in Lithuania, we have the Ashveni, exactly the same stories as the Ashvin. And also in Lithuania, you'll see little horses sometimes on rooftops and beehives. And they were seen as the protector of the Sun Maiden. So, it was different pagan religion, different gods, but same story. These twins, mortal, one immortal, protector of some sort of bright light or a sun, something to do with riding horses, or white, especially white horses, and sort of protectors that can be called upon, that are just and honest. And then in Latvia, we have the Ashvins again, and actually it's been morphed into something called the Uzins, and Uzin's Day is May the 9th, and it's Uzins is the god of light and spring, a symbol of fertility, again guardian of horses and bees. And bees I sort of take to be the fertility theme that runs with these twins, these celestial twins. So I just wanted to pause there because we're going to be switching views soon, any minute in fact, to the Eskimo Nebula, which we're going to find here over at my notes. Yes, on the solar system and the wide field. So we'll stay on the wide field if you're there now, and hopefully you'll see the Eskimo Nebula come in. But sort of continuing this story, can we say that everyone looked up and saw these two stars as representing this myth? And this seems to be a myth that spanned thousands and thousands of years that really didn't get distorted very much, even over miles and thousands of years. And we don't know, because we don't have any record really of anyone other than the Greeks and the Romans, and looking up at these two stars and calling them Gemini and saying, these are brothers, because some do say that the Ashvin are these two stars, but to be honest, in Vedic astrology, the Ashvin are actually the Alpha and Beta in the constellation Aries. So I'm doubtful, although I sort of can totally believe that this myth travelled with people and they looked up and said, oh, it's those two stars that happened to be in the sky when they were speaking, and then all of a sudden it became those two. So who knows whether it started with the two stars that we're looking at tonight or whether it was two different stars, we don't know. But there is this wonderful myth that seems to travel about these two brothers, and I kind of want to talk about why, but first I just want to give pause and look through the telescope. So if you're looking at the Canary Wide Field, the Eskimo Nebula is there, that big white blob in the middle. But we'll just check out the Canary solar system. I have not looked at the Eskimo Nebula through the Canary solar system, so I'm kind of intrigued. Okay, just trying to see. Right, so I'm assuming it's the one at the bottom. If you're looking through the Canary solar system, that's Canary 4, because you can begin to see some of the blurring around the edges because it's a nebula. So you might want to stay hanging out on Canary solar system, or alternate between that and Canary Wide Field, and see what happens, and see, maybe some colour will start to come in. And it's called the Eskimo Nebula because if you see some pictures that NASA have taken, who've got bigger telescopes than us, you'll see that it looks like maybe a head in the midst of a parka jacket hood. And there we go. If you're on Canary solar system, there's some colour starting to come through. Oh wow! And now we're really starting to see some of the nebulosity. That's fantastic. So I hate to sort of break it up, but I'll just sort of fill you in a bit about the Eskimo Nebula while we're looking at it. We're going to be looking at it for the next 7 minutes or so. So it's a planetary nebula, which has nothing to do with a planet. It's like a glowing shell of ionized gas, and it's gas that's come from an old red giant star late in its life. Wow! And now we're really seeing it turn blue, and the hood of our Eskimo come to life. So yeah, fantastic. Just walking. Oh, it's popped back, but we'll come back in a second. But just sort of continuing here then. The twins don't go away after the Romans. When Christianity came, that they kind of took up a new existence. So, according to some, the twin wonder-working saints Cosmas and Damian, if you've ever heard of them, if you're Catholic, you may have. They are just like a morphing of the story of twins. So Cosmas and Damian were thought to have lived in the 3rd century and were born in Arabia, and were both healers. and did lots of sort of wonderful deeds and saved people. And coincidentally, there's actually a basilica in the Roman Forum to these two saints, Cosmas and Damian, that's not far at all from the temple of Castor and Pollux, which I find very interesting, because maybe they did exist, or maybe they were just more tales in a different culture with a different spin of the same story of Castor and Pollux, Castor and Polygeuces. So, why do we have this reoccurring theme of these twins? What is it? And it actually has a name. A professor at Harvard coined this name, and he wrote about it, and it's called the divine double. And theosophists and theologians say that this myth theme, it's called, runs through our culture, through all different cultures around the world, through thousands years, because it is a way of explaining, or it's like they act as a symbol for the creation of consciousness, which sounds, like what? But this, there is this idea, and if you study any of the sort of the mystical texts of religion, so the Gnostic texts of Christianity, like the Gospel of Thomas, for example, if you look at Hinduism and the Vedas and some of the teachings of yoga, if you look at Sufism, or the mystic side of Islam, or if you look at Kabbalah, the mystic side of Judaism, they all teach that each one of us has two parts that cannot be separated, that each of us has the experience of living in the world and being mortal and dying, and we're subject to change and nature, just like nature is ever changing, so are we in our mortal flesh, but there is part of us that is immortal, so we are the divine double ourselves. So when stories have been told throughout humanity of this divine double, of these twins, and they're told in every culture, and if you think we're not telling it today, we are, but what we're calling it is the evil twin and the good twin. We have that story now, and it's pretty obvious when we think about it which one the evil twin is. It is the one that's mortal, that can do things in the world that that can be bad, whereas the immortal one is just always pure and good. So this, I just love that we've been telling, as I say, this same story over and over again, using the sky at night as like a blackboard for this story, but also in poetry and written stories throughout history. So, even like the Gospel of Thomas, some theosophists claim that Thomas was actually the twin of Jesus, and I know he's referred to as a twin in the Bible, in the New Testament, but some actually claim that it was, and obviously Jesus was the one who was immortal, and Thomas was the one who, doubting Thomas, was mortal. And it sort of throws new light, I think, on the fact that Pollux is the brighter star. So, even though we perceive Castor as the mortal one to be the alpha star, actually, even if we just look up at night, we can see that, the immortal part of ourselves, the part that when we die just goes back into the ethers and is reborn again, or whatever your belief is, stays up in heaven, like Pollux would have done if he'd gone alone. It's just sort of interesting that even in the star story, Castor, the mortal one, is seen as, is the lesser star, I suppose, even though we call it the alpha, which is interesting, because we tend to think that we don't really identify it with ourselves as immortal. Unless we're enlightened, I guess, but generally we identify ourselves as mortal only. Even one account I read claims that the temple of Castor and Pollux was basically shortened to just Castor, the temple of Castor, because by the time that the Romans, the Roman Empire, there was a lot of war, huge age of war. It was the age of Aries moving into Pisces, but and Mars was big on the scene, god of war. At that stage, there was sort of really, people weren't identifying with this sort of divine part of themselves at all. It was all about the mortal, sort of the evil twin, shall we say. So fascinating, really, really fascinating. So we're having a look now at the jellyfish nebula. So that is going to be seen, if you are with me in the space situation room, you're going to be clicking on either the Canary half meter. Yeah, no, we're going to start with the Canary half meter. Exactly what we're going to do. And that's Canary 1. So I'm just going to wait and see what emerges. So the jellyfish nebula is so cool because, well, it looks like a jellyfish. Hopefully we'll see it. Seems to be something appearing. Wonderful. I have not seen this, so I'm very excited. I did book a mission, but the clouds stopped me, so I haven't even been able to see it. And the jellyfish nebula is a galactic supernova remnant. And it's about 5,000 light years from Earth. So pretty far. It's pretty far, 5,000 times. What did I say? 6 trillion. So a supernova remnant is just the structure that results after the explosion of a star in a supernova. And that's sort of like the last stages of a massive star's life. So it's sort of marked with this huge titanic explosion, and it sort of leads to this wonderful sort of gaseous nebula. So it's thought that this supernova happened about between 3,000 and 30,000 years ago. So a fairly big range, but I guess in infinite terms it's a pretty small range, between 3,000 and 30,000 years ago. But I'm excited to look at these nebulae because there is a link to our stories of Castor and Pollux. So remember, I talked a little bit earlier and said that there is a link to the sea. There's a link to sea with the Ashvins and a link to sea with Castor and Pollux. It sort of comes about in this tale I'm going to tell about St. Elmo's fire, and there is a link between St. Elmo's fire and what we're seeing in these nebulae. So Paul's just told me there's a bit of wind. Just heard from Paul Coxton. He said there's a bit of wind in the Canary Islands, which is why we're getting a bit blown out on Canary 1 right now. It's quite sensitive, so the stars are sort of looking blurry. But you can begin to see a bit of the nebula on the sort of upper left, if you will. But hopefully we'll see a bit more. And we've also, I think we've got jellyfish on 2 as well, which is the Canary wide field, but I imagine, yeah. Oh, no, you can see a bit in the Canary, yeah, maybe if you want to swap over to the Canary wide field, which is Canary 2, you can see it a bit more clearly, a little less blurring. But so I'd hop about, if I were you, between Canary wide field and the Canary half meter, and see if you can catch this jellyfish nebula. It's going to be around for another 7 minutes or so. But St. Elmo's fire. So basically, St. Elmo's fire, I don't know if you've ever seen it, I haven't, but St. Elmo's fire is like a weather phenomenon whereby when there's times of like a strong electrical atmosphere, like a thunderstorm, a bright blue or like a violety glow appears like fire in some circumstances, and it will radiate from like tall, sharply pointed structures, and it's sometimes followed by like a hissing sound or even a bolt of lightning. So you often see it maybe on the top of a church spire, but back in the day, the most common sightings would have been by sailors of St. Elmo's fire on the tall masts of their ships. It would have provided just the right environment in a storm and for St. Elmo's fire to occur. So St. Elmo wasn't originally St. Elmo, it was St. Erasmus, and he was the patron saint of sailors. But back in Greek myth, the patron saint of sailors, or the protector of sailors, were in fact Castor and Pollux, or Castor and Pollux. You know, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You know, Greece was surrounded by water, so you have these two gods or two demigods, I guess, and one's just mortal, but these two heroes who, if you're thinking about this theme of them riding white horses, well, if you're riding around Greek islands, you're not going to be doing much on a horse, you're going to be on a boat. And I kind of find this fascinating because I don't know about you, but I grew up on the sea, and when it was very choppy, when the waves were very choppy, we would refer to them as the white horses. We'd say, look, the white horses are really out in force today. As you can see, there's like foamy waves. So I just think it's very interesting that, this sort of theme of Castor and Pollux, and then the Ashvins and riding white horses, but also that connection to the sea, and maybe the white horses sort of being something to do with the waves. But as I was saying, back to St. Elmo's fire and the connection with this jellyfish nebula. So because they were like the protectors of seamen, basically because they were out, and helped out on ships as they did with Jason and the Argonauts, Poseidon gave the brothers this role, and so they were both crew on the ship the Argo that sailed, as I mentioned, Jason and the Argonauts to rescue the Golden Fleece. And some tales say that during a great storm, the two brothers helped save the ship from sinking. And another story, which I just love, says that that everyone was waiting on the boat, the Argo, and when Castor and Pollux, or Polyjuices at the time, boarded, 2 bursts of St. Elmo's fire were seen at the masts, which I just love. So in ancient Greece, when sailors would see 2 occurrences of St. Elmo's fire in a storm, they would say, oh, thank goodness, it's the 2 brothers, Castor and Pollux, keeping us safe. If they saw only one, they thought they were going to be in big trouble. And they were called the Ladian Lights, so named after their mother, although it later became St. Elmo's fire. Originally, they were the Ladian Lights. And there's this lovely little poem. So Lada's twins, bright shining at their beck, oft have delivered stricken barks from wreck. Just sort of saying that when you see the twins shining on the mast, you're going to be saved. But what has that got to do with the jellyfish nebula? Well, St. Elmo's fire is a form of matter called plasma, and plasma is also produced in stars. It's just ionized gas, which consists of positive ions and free electrons, that sort of normally happens at very low pressures or very high temperatures, and high temperatures is what happens in stars, obviously. So I just love that there is actually this I'm looking at the jellyfish nebula now, and I can kind of see the orange coming in, or the red coming in. I'm on the Canary wide field. I'm just going to hop over to the Canary half meter and see. Oh my goodness, wow, so you can really see the color of the jellyfish nebula there. It's a beautiful red, wonderful. Oh, I'm so happy we get to see that. Wow, that's great. But yeah, it's just so interesting to think that these brothers are sort of connected with, kind of what we're looking at now. Not only were they stars, but this on Earth we can experience a little bit of stars, a little bit of this nebula in the plasma of St. Elmo's fire. So beautiful. I'm really pleased. Great. Okay. Right. So I'm just going to take a break. I didn't look at my email, so just want to check to see if I've missed anything. No. Okay. While we're gazing at our jellyfish nebula, I'm just going to take a sip of tea. Right. Okay. Oh, I'm really thrilled. So next up, we're going to be looking at an open cluster, and it's M35. It's going to be appearing in a moment, and I believe we're going to be seeing that on Canary 2, which is the Canary wide field. So we're hanging out right now on the Canary wide field or the Canary half meter, just gazing at the jellyfish nebula. If you just joined us, we're talking about Gemini. Yeah, and Canary 2 is starting to switch it over already. And I did set Chile 1 to it, but in 5 minutes. But I think Chile, from what I gather, is clouded out tonight, so we're not going to be taking a look at it there. So yeah, if you're over on the Canary Wide Field, you want to take a look. This is M35. So it says an open cluster. It was discovered by Philippe Loy de Chasseau in 1745, and then independently discovered by John Bevis before 1750. An interesting fact, this cluster is scattered over an area of the sky almost the size of the full moon. So it is huge. And there's a lovely bit on it in Burnham's Celestial Handbook, which we're all mad about Slooh at the moment, because it's just got so many wonderful things in it. But it says that S. Raab, I do not know who S. Raab is, but in his paper, Research on Open Clusters, he describes this as a splendid specimen, which I just love. A very large, thin and circular cluster without sharply conspicuous condensation. On the contrary, the centre seems to be rather void of stars. In the vicinity of the centre is a gathering of 5 or 6 stars. The cluster passes imperceptibly into the environs, the environs. I just love this. I love reading these old books. Well, the Burnham's is not that old, but he quotes a lot of people in it who are. So that I'm not sure when that particular quote came from, but I was thinking the early 1900s. So here we are, just gazing at this beautiful star cluster, and I just love this. To sort of wrap everything together, I kind of just wanted to end with a story that is from a totally different part of the world. So not everyone saw the two as twins, although the story I'm going to talk to you about, they did see them as twins. Just, by way of example, the Eskimos saw Castor and Pollux as the doorstops to their igloos. So they looked up in the sky and would say, those 2 stars are doorstops to the igloos. They were also seen as peacocks. The Egyptians did see them as twins, but they also saw them as plants. And again, we don't know for sure that they were talking about Castor and Pollux in Gemini, although we sort of can kind of guess that they were. And 2 camels was another one, sometimes a boy and a girl, but often they pop up as twins. This whole myth of twins comes up again and again. And the story I'm going to tell you, it's a Maori story, and I think it kind of like speaks to this whole idea of this divine double, that within every one of us there are these inseparable parts, one mortal and one immortal, that cannot be parted. I'm just looking at this cluster and loving what's happening down here at the lower right. Just loving it, and the colour coming in, fantastic. But this idea that, as I say, sort of runs through, there are Native American stories, there are a similar vein to the one I'm going to read you, that's the Maori legend. But you'll notice some of the themes crop up again in this Maori story. So it's from, South Pacific and New Zealand. But there's mention of water, of not wanting to be separate, of something trying to separate them. In this case, a mother and not death, or parents and not death trying to separate them. So here's the story, and this is from a really beautiful book. It's Susanna Hislop. She does sort of takes constellations and turns them into really fun stories. So in Maori legend, these 2 are the sons of Bora Bora. These 2 twin boys were devoted to each other, as thick as thieves in their private universe. But their parents worried they didn't play with the other children. And like so many unfortunate parents, in trying to do the right thing, they ended up doing the worst thing. When the boys overheard that their parents were planning to split them up, they snuck out of their beds in the middle of the night and stole into their father's boat. And off they sailed into the darkness. Awoken by maternal intuition, Their mother saw the empty beds and ran to the shore. In the distance, their sail gleamed in the moonlight, and she jumped into a neighbour's boat in pursuit. She chased them around island after island and all the way up a mountain in Tahiti. But just as she was about to reach her 2 little boys, they leapt off the top of the mountain and into the sky, where they remain forever as stars. I just love this because I think, as hopefully you can see that there's this just, a repetition of this theme of this idea of 2 parts that cannot be separated. And you have to sort of ask yourself, well, why is this theme constantly recurring across cultures and across time? Like, could it possibly be true? Are we both immortal and mortal? I'd like to ask Paul Cox if he was here what he thinks. My belief is that we are. Chiefly as I'm a minister and I've studied some of these texts on my own personal experience, but not many of my friends agree with me, so I'm open to all sides. But I just, Gemini is such a beautiful constellation. As we looked at tonight, we've got this lovely open cluster. There's the Jellyfish Nebula, there's the Eskimo Nebula, and then Castor and Pollux, which themselves are easy to find. We just going outside and looking, they're easy to find. And so hopefully, some of these themes and not only spark imagination or help us sort of ask deeper questions, perhaps. I mean, the myth, that's all myth is just a way of, our subconscious just sort of exploring and then expressing itself. So, these constellation stories really I feel so passionate about, because as I say, not only do they sort of spark imagination and get you thinking, but they're a way of really navigating the night sky and beginning to learn. So hopefully now when you step out and you see Castor and Pollux, you'll never see them with the same light again. You'll think about, they're linked to St. Elmo's fire and the plasma that's also expressed in the Eskimo Nebula and the Jellyfish Nebula that lies within the Gemini constellation. And maybe you'll think about one that shines a little less brightly than the other, and that one being blue and being the mortal one, and Pollux being immortal, and what does that mean? So I'm really thrilled to be here talking about it, and glad that we had such a clear night. Wonderful, so we could really see some of these amazing things that are in Gemini. Thrilled. So we've got a couple minutes left on the Canary wide field of M35, but don't forget that you can book the telescopes this week, and Slooh books out slots. We're looking at the Gemini all week because the Geminids are coming up, and we have a show on the Geminids as well. That is Wednesday at 9 p.m. There's going to be a show with Paul Cox and Dr. Paige Godfrey are going to be talking about the Geminids. So all week we're talking Gemini. So come on, there's posts in Illuminations. Best of Illuminations has some posts about Gemini right now. A lot of the things I talked about tonight I write up and put on Illuminations, so you can go back and read about it if you want. You're welcome to email me, helen@slooh.com. I'm happy to share all of my sources that I used for tonight. So please ask away and email away. And some wonderful things also on Slooh this week. So we have, I don't know if you've been listening, but Dr. Paige Godfrey does an intro to astronomy every Wednesday, which are amazing. She really breaks things down. So that's a series of 12, I believe. I think this Wednesday is the third one. And also Paul Cox was on just before I was on. He was on at 8, talking about things you can see this week, and pointing out some of the things that Slooh has booked its telescopes to see, so that people can just piggyback on a mission and see some of these great things in Gemini. So if you didn't get enough of the jellyfish tonight, you can hop back in the week and see when a mission might be going, and same to the Eskimo Nebula. So that's really it from me for this week. Next week, back at the same time, we'll be talking about Auriga. It's a constellation that we're just not really familiar with it, it doesn't come with these huge stories, but it actually is really, really interesting, and there are some cool things to see in Auriga, and there are a couple of tales that are really fascinating. So it's, if you're not familiar with this, and of course it has Capella in it, which is an amazing star, so definitely come back next week at 9 if you want to hear about that. I'll be here, of course, and in the meantime, I wish you all very clear skies. Thank you very much for joining this evening, and may both sides of you have a really blessed week, and I can't wait to come back next week and talk about Auriga. I haven't posted it on the website yet, but I will be probably tomorrow or Tuesday. Also, just sort of finally, run some polls on Twitter. It's Helen Avery 12, I think, around constellations that if you're taking part. I will be talking about them at some point, but you can always hop over to Twitter and follow me there and take part in a poll. They're all about constellations. We can do sort of a bit of a collection and a breakdown at some point of all the data that we're getting. So that's it to say. I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope whatever team you're rooting for, if you were watching the football, won, especially if they're wearing blue and orange. So yeah, that's it from me. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thanks.